Chapter 4. Growing Concern. The morning sun filtered through the leaves of the nearby trees, casting soft patterns of light and shadow across the dusty trail. Ash, Misty, and Brock had been traveling for a few hours now, heading toward the next town on their journey. Pikachu trotted happily beside them, its usual enthusiasm undimmed by the long walk. But Ash's mind was 1,000 miles away. It had been a month since the battle with Team Rocket. A month since Psyduck's confusion attack had knocked him out cold in the middle of that chaotic fight. A month since the changes had started, slow at first, but now accelerating in ways that were impossible to ignore. Ash's heart pounded in his chest, his thoughts racing as he tried to make sense of what was happening to him. His reflection had become a stranger's face in the mirror, and his body, his once familiar, athletic frame, had morphed into something else entirely. Something feminine. He tugged at the hem of his shirt nervously, feeling the fabric cling to his body in ways that it hadn't before. His clothes, once baggy and boyish, no longer fit. His torso had shrunk, his waist narrowing to a degree that made his old shirts hang awkwardly off his frame. His hips, now wider and more pronounced, caused his pants to pull tight in ways that made him self-conscious with every step. And his hair, his wild, spiky hair, was now long and soft, brushing against his shoulders with every movement. Subtle streaks of orange had appeared in it, like faint echoes of Misty's signature bright red. But the worst part, the part that Ash couldn't bear to think about, was what had happened below the waist. Ash had tried to ignore it at first. The shrinking, the uncomfortable tightness, the way his pants had started to fit differently around his groin. But now, there was no denying it. His penis had practically disappeared, shrinking over the course of the last few weeks until it was nothing more than a faint, almost imperceptible bulge. His testicles had pulled up and vanished entirely, leaving Ash completely flat in the front, like a girl. He swallowed hard, the thought making his stomach churn. Misty had noticed the changes. Of course, how could she not? At first, she had laughed it off, making lighthearted jokes about how Ash was starting to look more like her. But over the past week, her jokes had stopped. She still smiled, still tried to act like everything was fine, but there was a tension in her voice now, a worry that she couldn't quite hide. Ash hadn't told her the full extent of what was happening. He didn't want to worry her, didn't want her to think something was seriously wrong. But deep down, he knew it was. This wasn't just some weird side effect of Psyduck's confusion. This was something else, something far more terrifying. Ash? Misty's voice pulled him out of his thoughts, and he turned to look at her. She was walking beside him, her blue eyes filled with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Yeah?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual, though it came out slightly higher than he intended. He winced inwardly at the sound. His voice had been changing too, rising in pitch until it was almost unrecognizable as his own. "You've been really quiet lately," Misty said, her brow furrowed. I mean, I know you don't always talk a lot, but you've seemed off. Is everything okay?" Ash hesitated, his heart pounding. He wanted to tell her the truth, wanted to spill everything that had been weighing on his mind. But the words caught in his throat. How could he explain what was happening when he didn't even understand it himself? "I'm fine," he said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just, tired from all the traveling." Misty didn't look convinced, but she didn't push the issue. Okay, she said softly, though her eyes lingered on his face for a moment longer. "But if something's bothering you, You can tell me. You know that, right? Right? Ash nodded, guilt gnawing at him. He hated lying to her. But what could he say? I know. Thanks. Thanks, Misty. They walked in silence for a while longer, the sound of Pikachu's cheerful cries and Brock's humming the only noise breaking the quiet. But Ash's mind was far from peaceful. The changes had become too much to ignore, and his clothes, his once comfortable, familiar clothes, no longer fit his body. He had tried to make do at first, but now, his pants wouldn't even button all the way, and his shirts hung awkwardly, too loose in some places and too tight in others. It had become clear that he needed new clothes. The clothing store in the small town they had stopped in was quaint, with racks of brightly colored shirts, pants, and accessories lining the walls. Ash stood in the middle of the store, feeling awkward and out of place as he scanned the shelves. Misty was off looking at some hats, while Brock had gone to the market to pick up supplies. Ash's heart pounded as he looked over the men's section, desperately hoping to find something that would fit his changing body. But as he rifled through the racks, pulling out shirts and pants to try on, it became painfully clear that nothing in the men's section would work. The pants were too baggy in the waist, the shirts too loose around his torso. His body had changed too much. With a sinking feeling, Ash glanced over at the women's section. He hesitated, his stomach twisting with a mixture of embarrassment and dread. But what choice did he have? His body had changed so much that he couldn't wear his old clothes anymore, and the thought of walking around in ill-fitting, uncomfortable clothes made him cringe. Taking a deep breath, he made his way over to the women's section, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel his face growing hot with embarrassment as he scanned the racks, looking for something that wouldn't be feminine. After a few minutes, he found a pair of low-waisted skinny jeans that, while undeniably fitted, didn't seem overly girly. He picked them up, along with a plain white tank top that was simple enough. He couldn't help but wince as he noticed how small the waist of the jeans was. It was hard to believe that they would fit him, but they did. Ash stood in the dressing room, staring at his reflection in the mirror. The jeans hugged his hips tightly, the fabric clinging to his legs in a way that felt both strange and unsettling. The tank top was snug too, fitting closely to his now much slimmer torso. He looked different. His body, once boyish and athletic, was now undeniably feminine. His hips were wide, his waist slim, his legs long and shapely. The clothes fit him perfectly, but they accentuated all the changes that had taken place. And then there was the underwear. Ash had tried to avoid it, but his old boxers had become so loose and uncomfortable that he had no choice but to buy something new. The only problem was that the men's underwear didn't fit anymore. His groin was completely flat, and the boxers just bunched up awkwardly. So, with a sinking heart, Ash had picked up a pack of women's underwear. Simple, lacy panties that made his face burn with embarrassment just thinking about them. Now, standing in the dressing room, he could feel the lace against his skin, soft and delicate, in a way that made him feel both uncomfortable and something he didn't want to think about. He ran a hand through his hair, which had grown even longer in the past week, now brushing against his shoulders in soft, silky waves. The faint orange streaks were more noticeable now, blending with his natural black hair in a way that was almost pretty. Ash swallowed hard, his heart racing as he stared at his reflection. This can't be happening, he thought, his mind swirling with confusion and fear. I'm not turning into a girl. I'm not. But as he looked at himself, it was becoming harder and harder to deny the truth. Later that day, Ash sat by the edge of a small pond, staring down at his reflection in the water. His heart felt heavy, his mind racing with thoughts and questions he didn't know how to answer. His face was almost identical to Misty's now. The same soft cheeks, the same delicate jawline, the same full lips. His hair, long and streaked with orange, framed his face in a way that made him look almost pretty. His torso was slim, his waist narrow, his hips wide, and his once male groin, was completely flat. He looked like a girl. No, no, not just a girl. He looked like Misty. Ash's stomach churned, a wave of nausea washing over him. He couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. He couldn't keep brushing off the changes as some weird side effect of Sidex confusion. This was something else. Something far worse. He needed answers. And there was only one person he could think of who might be able to help. Professor Oak. The decision to visit Professor Oak wasn't an easy one. Ash didn't want to worry his friends, didn't want to admit that something was seriously wrong. But as the days passed and the changes continued, his unease grew into something he couldn't ignore. One morning, after another restless night of tossing and turning, Ash packed up his things and told Misty and Brock that he needed to visit Professor Oak. He tried to keep his voice casual, but he could see the worry in Misty's eyes. "Are you sure you're okay?" Misty asked, her voice soft and filled with concern. "You've been acting different lately." Ash forced a smile, though it felt shaky. Yeah, I'm fine. I think Professor Oak might have some answers about what's going on." Misty hesitated, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean? What's going on?" Ash's heart pounded. He didn't want to tell her the truth, didn't want to admit how scared he was. "It's just the confusion attack," he said quickly. "I think there might be some lingering effects. I just want to make sure everything's okay." Misty didn't look convinced, but she nodded. "Okay, but be careful, okay? And let us know if you need anything." I will," Ash promised, though the words felt hollow. As he watched Misty and Brock wave goodbye, Ash felt a pang of guilt twist in his chest. He wasn't telling them the whole truth. He wasn't telling them how scared he really was. But he couldn't. Not yet. Not yet. He needed answers first. As Ash made his way toward Professor Oak's lab, his mind raced with questions. What was happening to him? Why was his body changing like this? Was it reversible? Could it be stopped? He didn't know. But one thing was clear. He was running out of time.